Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Japan and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel once before. So the last beer that I had from this brewery was really quite nice, a style that you don't come across all that often, a sour IPA, but I have to say it was really well done. And when it comes to this brewery, they're a very new addition to the Japanese beer scene, but they've built up a very good reputation for themselves. And a lot of that is because, one, the quality of their beers is very good, but two, they're doing things that other breweries haven't done all that much of in Japan. So this is one of the breweries that I'm going to keep an eye on going forward. So the beer that we're going to have a look at today is one of their latest releases at the time of filming. It's a style that I haven't tried from them yet, but a style that is very popular across the craft beer scene at the moment. And it's also a sub-style that I haven't tried too many examples of from Japanese breweries, and it's certainly one of the strongest, if not the strongest, within that particular subcategory as well that I've had from a Japanese brewery. So needless to say, I'm really curious to see what this one is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head a little bit to the north of me here in Osaka, up to Tokyo Prefecture. We're going to go out to the west of the city, to a little place called Okutama, and that means that we're going to have a look at another beer from Vertere. So this particular beer is called Tristis. It comes in at 10% ABV, and this one is a New England Hazy Imperial Triple, whatever you want to call it, IPA. So yeah, as far as memory goes, I've only had one or two triple IPAs of any description, be that West Coast or New England, from Japanese breweries, but this may well be only one or two New England Hazy Imperial Triple IPAs that I've had from a Japanese brewery, and that was the main reason this one caught my eye actually, and it is supposed to be a really nice one, and I've heard that these guys do some very, very good hazies. So let's crack on with this one then and see what it's going to have in store for us. This beer, of course, was another one that I picked up from Liquor Shop Asahiya in Taishibashi Yamaichi here in Osaka. Lovely little beer shop that is run by Koji and his daughter Rika. You'll find the link to their shop in the video description below. Follow them on Instagram or Facebook, whichever one is your choice, and you'll see all the interesting Japanese craft beers that are getting released at the moment. But yeah, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Vertere, and we will see about adding some more to that list as time goes on. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support that you give is massively appreciated, and remember, you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer using the geography tagging system. So just go in there, use the little search bar, put in your hometown, state, county, whatever you like. If I've reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Japanese playlist along with a number of other things. That's being added to quite regularly at the moment, I will add as well. But you make sure you check out the playlist of beers from other countries as well, because there are some very interesting things on the channel these days. But yeah, let's go on to my brewery notes then, and I'll tell you a wee bit about Vertere again. So, Vertere, as I mentioned to you already, are based in the little town of Okutama, which is in the western part of Tokyo Prefecture, about a 1.5 hour train ride from central Tokyo. So, the two men behind the company are Hikaru Suzuki and Kage Sujinogi, who is the brewer. But apparently the two had dreamed about starting a company together since they were in high school. They were schoolmates. But Kage worked in a brew pub called Koenji and then spent 3 years learning to brew and perfecting his own recipes on the side. But the company started in a 70-year-old traditional house, which is about 30 seconds away from the front of Okutama Station, and apparently it took them over 6 months to renovate the house and get it ready to host the restaurant and brewery. So they started off with 3 taps in 2015, but soon upgraded the system to 10, all of which are now their own beers. I think they were just doing their own beers every so often when they first started up, but now it is all their own stuff. But the brewing takes place in a small hut of about 7.5 square metres behind the restaurant and bar counter, and at the moment they've got 2 brew kits. They've got one 500 litre and one 1000 litre kit, and they've gradually expanded the fermentation capacity over the last few years. In 2018, they also started cultivating hops in a field about 20 minutes drive away from the house, and they've also been working to build up the harvest every year. So you will see these guys producing more and more beers with their own hops, from what I understand. But they started canning their beers in 2019, and they released the first cans in September of that year. And that's about the time that I started seeing these beers appear on the Liquor Shop Asahiya page, actually. I think that sounds about right, just before the kind of COVID pandemic kicked off. But as of October 2023, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 95 different kinds of beer according to Untappd, and they've done a whole host of different things. You'll find quite a few different saisons from them. They do different kinds of IPAs as well. I've seen 1 or 2 dark things, but they've done a number of wheat beers with different fruits and things like that as well, just from memory. So we need to have a look at one of those on the channel at some point in the fairly near future. But that is everything I can really tell you about Vertere for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all those different beers that they've done. But yeah, I think we can go on and actually have a little look at the beer itself. So to give you the details of this beer, as I mentioned earlier, this one is a 10% New England Hazy Imperial Triple, whatever you want to call it, IPA. This one is brewed with Pilsner and wheat malts, flaked oats and Turo in the malt base, and then there's Idaho 7 and Centennial in the hop bill, and it uses an English ale yeast with a little bit of dextrose as well. Now, out of the hops in this one, we know Idaho 7 and Centennial quite well. Idaho 7 is a slightly newer hop, about 14% alpha acid, and that's going to give you lots of nice kind of soft tropical notes like juicy mango, papaya, apricot, a little bit of pineapple as well, whereas Centennial is one of the older American hops, about 12% alpha acid if I'm not mistaken, and that gives you a big kind of oily, lemony, zesty type thing actually. So yeah, very popular hop in older West Coast IPAs, but it's a bit softer in things in the New England IPAs. The name, and this is one of the things about Vertere, they quite often use Latin names for their beers because they're quite into nature and things like this. The name Tristis, as far as I could figure, there are two main things in biology, or 2 recognisable things that have Tristis in their name. So one of them is the night flowering jasmine, and the other one is the American goldfinch. And the word itself is an old adjective that can mean like, vulgar or like bad smelling and stuff like this. Apparently, it's a word that I'd never really heard of before actually. But yeah, that's a little summary of the name and the details of the beer for you. But just to let you have a little look at the artwork on this one, there you can see a little plant, so I'm wondering if it's probably referring to the night flowering jasmine, the name of this one. But there you can see Tristis and Vertere. They do use this kind of minimalist style with their cans, which is pretty cool. But you can see plain silver top on the can there, and yeah, nicely presented. So this one is a ½ litre. I believe this beer cost me about 1,500 Japanese yen, so that translates to roughly about £9 sterling, something like that, maybe nearer £10, so it's going to be about €11, $12 American, something like that. So as I've mentioned in many of the Japanese reviews before, craft beer is pretty expensive in Japan. It's actually cheaper to buy sake, which is higher in alcohol, and you get more volume of course. I think it's just the barley tax. They don't really produce their own barley here in fact, so yeah, beer is a little bit pricier in Japan, but that's just life, and wages of course are not very high in Japan by comparison with other countries, or in comparison with other countries. Bad English grammar. But yeah, let's get this guy out into the glass then and see what it's all about. The Tristis Triple IPA, a New England Hazy Triple IPA from what I understand, from Vertere in Okutama, Tokyo Prefecture. So let's do this, see what this guy is all about. Oh, this is interesting actually. Looks as if it could be more of an American IPA rather than being specifically New England. And for those of you who don't know, There's always West Coast and New England IPAs. New England ones are the hazy IPAs that contain a little bit of wheat and oat in the malt base along with the barley, whereas the West Coast IPAs contain mostly barley malt, but it's not unheard of to use like a little bit of oat and wheat in them. These days there's also the American IPAs, which are somewhere in between, and this beer looks as if it's going to be one of those, to be honest with you. But yeah, anyway, you can see that this beer has poured pretty much as you would expect of any sort of modern IPA. You've got about a half finger, maybe a 2/3 finger of a frothy, I would say kind of cream coloured head, and that is fading away to be a little bit of a thinner kind of foamy layer. If I bring that up to the camera, you can see the bubbles on the surface of the liquid are actually fairly decent in size, and the head gets a little bit foamier the further up that you go. But yeah, in terms of colour of this one, this is actually quite a murky and sort of amber leaning IPA, this one, and it's definitely hazy as well. And we know that it contains oat and wheat, so yeah, technically it is a New England IPA in that case, I guess. So remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort ball is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar is caramelised, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging that you do or adjuncts that you put into the beer will affect its colour as well. But when it comes to IPAs, for the most part, you don't have to care about adjuncts. And if we're talking specifically about New England IPAs, the level of haze in these beers depends on the oat content, wheat content, and to a degree what yeast you use. It can vary from brewery to brewery and of course beer to beer. But this one has a good little bit of haze to it. It's looking a little bit soupier and gloopier, but certainly not the soupiest and gloopiest of 10% New Englands that I've come across. I can certainly say that. And as I say, it's got a more kind of rich amber colour to it, this one, than some of the New Englands that I would have seen. As I say, I've got a feeling this beer might be a little bit more along the lines of an American IPA rather than being specifically New England. But yeah, good little bit of haze to it, not too much in the way of visible carbonation, just one or two big bubbles at the bottom of the glass and a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there, and you can see that head has faded away to be a thinner foamy layer just now. So yeah, interesting stuff actually. But yeah, nothing else we can really say about the appearance of this one. Let's have a wee look at the aroma and see what this beer is all about. Oh yeah, aroma wise, you can smell that this one is a bit of a beast actually. Yeah, and it does smell kind of like New England. It actually reminds me a little bit of some of the Lawson's Finest Liquids or the Alchemist beers that I've had actually from New England over in the US. I think those breweries are both Vermont, if I remember correctly. But for me, when it comes to New England IPAs, they can lean sort of 6 ways in terms of maltiness and yeastiness. So you've got the farmhousey, yeasty side of the beer. You've also got the rye leaning grainy side of things. Those two elements are a little bit more common in American brewed New England IPAs, but you've got wheaty bitiness, oaty creaminess, barley malt bread, and also the sweeter side of the malts as well. So yeah, with this one, I would say you've got a little bit of the kind of farmhousey yeast in there. You can certainly smell a wee bit of the wheaty bitiness as well, and you've definitely got a little bit of the oat in there. And this beer is pretty fresh as well, from what I understand. I think it was a very kind of recent release actually. So the Vertere ones actually sell very fast at Asahiya, but this one has a little bit of everything to it. So let's just try and break that aroma down and describe it for you a wee bit more in depth if you like. So the backbone of this beer, it is absolutely like a fresh white bready bread crust. You do get little elements of woody character in there. There's little bits of like Jacob's cream cracker and things like that as well. But then you get the bready notes out of this one, and the bready character really has this woody, crackery kind of note to it, which I think is really interesting. So yeah, lovely kind of, as I say, woody, crackery type note coming out of this one. You've got a little bit of like a brown bready character coming out of this beer, like a wholemeal crusty brown bread. You've definitely got some white bready character in there as well, and in the back of the nose you can absolutely smell a little bit of that kind of more pungent, bitey, wheaty character coming out of the beer. So yeah, that's really interesting. Now on the oaty side of things, you can smell the oats actually come across as being like quite wet and almost like porridgey. So yeah, that's really interesting in this one. So yeah, definitely a little bit of that more kind of porridgey, kind of wet, squidgy oat. It doesn't come across as like overly creamy or anything like that, and that sort of aids the kind of farmhousey. This beer does have a little bit of an almost farmhousey type vibe to it. But then on top of that, you start to get the sweetness. And so the sweetness for me in this beer, it's got a little bit of that kind of Werther's Original, like butter candy, butterscotch, but you're also getting this kind of fruity, sherbety sort of thing out of it as well. And you'll notice that in a few New England IPAs actually. It's usually when breweries are first kind of experimenting with these higher ABV ones, you get a little bit of this kind of fruity, sherbety kind of note out of them. It reminds me of a sweet back home in Scotland called Parma Violets. So the beer has a little bit of that aroma mixed in with this Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy sort of thing. And with this one, just with looking at the colour of this, I think to the naked eye, it's actually appearing a little bit darker to me than it is to you guys on the camera. It's almost, to the naked eye, it's almost the same colour as this hoodie actually. But you guys are seeing it, just looking at the viewfinder, you guys are seeing it as a very bright yellow actually, like a mango juice type colour, whereas yeah, it really is more of a rich kind of ambery type note as we mentioned earlier. But yeah, I think that's everything we really need to say about the malty and yeasty side of things. Let's have a wee look at the hoppy side of things. So green component wise, it kind of gives you what you'd expect. You've got a little bit of earthiness in there, and you've got this big, bright floral aromaticity and quite a bit of zesty, grassy character at the front of the nose too. The zesty grassiness, I think, is most likely to come from the Centennial actually, and that is a more lemony leaning hop as I mentioned earlier. The thing you have to remember with IPAs is that there are three kinds of hoppings that you can do. Early addition hopping, which takes place within the first hour of the wort boil, that gives you mainly bitterness, and in terms of flavour and aroma, that translates to like a deep, dank green component. You've got the late addition hopping, which takes place within the last half hour of the wort boil. Gives you a little bit of bitterness, but mainly flavour and aroma. That's going to give you a brighter green component in terms of flavour and aroma. And then you've got dry hopping, which takes place after the wort boil is complete, and that's all about the flavour, no bitterness involved there. Now, New England IPAs tend to use late addition and dry hopping for the most part. West Coast IPAs use all three, and that's why they have that deeper, danker aroma as well as or flavour and aroma, as well as a bigger bitterness. And it's quite obvious with this one that they're using late addition and dry hopping for the most part. You can just smell it in the kind of brightness of the beer actually. So yeah, let's have a wee look at the fruity side of the aroma of this one then, just to kind of round off. So on the fruity side of things, I would say the beer's kind of what you would expect. So obviously you've got that kind of fruity, sherbety sort of thing from the yeast coming out of this one, but you have got a nice little bit of a peachy type note out of this one, which I'm guessing would be coming from the IDO 7, so you have got a wee bit of that in there, but lots of big, juicy and very ripe mango. I don't know if I would go as far as guava, because guava to me has always been like a very ripe but kind of green mango. But I could see people saying there was guava in this. But yeah, for me, peach, mango, guava potentially, yeah, because it really does have quite a little bit of that peachy, guava type sharpness to it. But yeah, you've got that juicy, ripe mango underneath. Absolutely, you're getting little bits of apricot and papaya and things out of this one, and a kind of more oily, pineapple-y character, but definitely at the front of the nose. You get a lot of that kind of zesty, that lemony zesty kind of Centennial type character. So yeah, overall it's quite an interesting aroma, this one. It reminds me of some of the really old school high ABV New Englands that I had back in the day, and as I said, I don't think they've done too many that are this strength, so this is going to be quite interesting to try actually. As I always say, take a bit of time to enjoy that aroma before you get stuck into the beer, but I think it is about time for us to try this one and see what it's all about. So yeah, this one is the Tristis, 10% New England Hazy Imperial Triple, whatever you want to call it, IPA from Vertere in Okutama, Tokyo Prefecture here in Japan. Slàinte, skål, cheers, kanpai. Ooh. I'm going to say, this beer, it is quite different in the way it comes across in comparison with its quite different in the way that it comes across in its flavour than it is from the aroma. What I'm trying to say here, brain's a bit tired. The flavour and the aroma in this one, what you would expect from the flavour from the aroma, it diverges quite a little bit here. It's a very smooth, really bready leaning New England IPA, this one, and it's definitely, I would say, just from the flavours and stuff, it is definitely a New England IPA, this. There's not much doubt in my mind about that. It's not quite sweet enough and it's not quite bitter enough to be considered as an American IPA. It's not got enough West Coasty character to it, to be honest with you, so definitely New England Hazy, this. But a very nice beer, and it covers its alcohol dangerously well actually. You'll probably feel it after you're halfway through the can though. But yeah, let's break this one down then and describe the flavour a bit more in depth, as we always do. Middle third of the palate then. The backbone of the beer, you absolutely have this little bit of you've got the base of this beer is that fresh, white bready bread crust coming out of it. So yeah, fresh white bready bread crust in there. As you move further forward on that middle third of the palate, you definitely get some kind of woody notes in the base there. They come out a bit more into the aftertaste, and you've also got a wee bit of this kind of dry, crackery sort of note coming out of the beer too. On top of the that middle, on top of the kind of crackery, I think you've got a layer of cracker on top of the bread crust, in fairness, with this one. But then on top of that, you get a few different kind of bready layers coming out of this beer. The sort of profile that you're getting out of this one, it really does remind me, as I say, of like Lawson's Finest Liquids, or yeah, it reminds me of Lawson's Finest Liquids, or like Alchemist type. You know, this one, it really has a bit more of a kind of farmhousey and kind of yeasty type character to it. So yeah, above the sort of crackery layer, you get this kind of wholemeal brown bready type note coming out of the beer. So yeah, lovely kind of fluffy wholemeal brown bready type character coming out of this one. And then yeah, above that you can feel like a white bready type note, but you get more and more graininess and woodiness and crackeriness out of this beer into the aftertaste. But then above the white bread, you can feel the kind of wheaty layer coming out of this one, and the beer doesn't have the wheaty bitiness I was picking up in the aroma. The wheat isn't even, I don't feel the wheat in this beer is really even densifying out the mouthfeel of the beer particularly much. It's kind of just adding a little bit of like smoothness to the top of the white bread. And as I said in a number of the American reviews I did recently, I was surprised. American wheat is a lot smoother and densifies out the body of the IPAs brewed there a lot better, I think, than the European wheat does. So I'd be curious to know where exactly the wheat in this beer has come from, because I can't imagine that Japan produces too much wheat itself. But again, these breweries are quite small scale, so if there was Japanese wheat in here, that would kind of make sense, to be honest, because it feels a bit different. But yeah, on top of that kind of smoother, wheaty white bready layer, you can feel a bit of the oaty character coming out of the beer. So like as you go down that middle line of your tongue, you absolutely get like a slightly creamy oaty character, but as you move out toward the edges of that middle third of your palate, it feels a little bit kind of wetter and kind of porridgey, if that makes sense. Then you get a bit of the oaty dryness coming out of the beer the further into the aftertaste you go. And when it comes to New England's, usually the oaty character is a very good indicator, or a decent indicator, of how fresh your beer is. Essentially, the smoother and creamier the oats are, the fresher the beer is, the drier they are, the older the beer is. But this beer I know is pretty fresh, and it is a bit stronger actually, so this one is kind of interesting. But as I say, you get that more porridgey, oaty character out, you know, the further out to the sides of your palate you go. But then in the centre of your tongue, right in the dead centre of your palate, you can feel that little circle there, and you've got the kind of Werther's Original, kind of butter candy, butterscotchy notes underneath. And then you've got that kind of sweeter, almost caramelly note in the dead centre of your palate, and that is, of course, just the alcohol coming out of the beer. You do perhaps get a little bit of like a McVitie's digestive biscuity note, particularly into the aftertaste, and that would be explained by the presence of the Pilsner malt in this one. And you do feel a little bit of that Pilsner malty dryness toward the back of that middle third of your palate, of course. So that's quite interesting. But yeah, I think that's everything we need to say about the middle third of your palate in this beer, to be quite honest. But it is good, this one. It's really nice. So let's go to the back third of your palate then. And generally speaking, with your palate, you're going to get more. You do get a very slight sort of vegetable taste out of this one, the further into the aftertaste that you go as well, so that's worth bearing in mind. That'll be from the yeast. Yeah, generally speaking, the further forward on the palate you are, the more likely you are to get sweeter kind of flavours, but the further back that you go, the more likely you are to get kind of bitter and dry sort of flavours. And between the middle and back third of your palate, you're going to get similar flavours, just at kind of different intensities. So yeah, the border region between middle and back third of your palate, you've got a nice little bit of a kind of brown bready sort of thing in there. You've got a white bready character sitting on top of that. Then you've also got just a wee bit of a kind of like Pilsner malty dryness sitting in there. But then yeah, the back third of your palate, you can feel the bread crust is in there. It just feels a little bit kind of drier and more grainy. You've got the kind of crackery layer sitting on top of that, which again feels drier and more grainy. Then you've got the brown bready character in there, which just feels that little bit lighter and more airy, but also a little bit taller. Then the white bready character just sits above that as well. And then you can feel the kind of Pilsner malty crispness, just kind of that dryness of the Pilsner malt just creeping over the top of that. In fact, no, you can feel a little bit of the wheaty bitiness there. You do get a little bit of that wheaty bitiness underneath, and then the dryness, the crisper, the more crisp kind of Pilsner malt just creeping over the top of that. And then above everything else on that back third of your palate, you've got the sort of yeasty character coming out of the beer too. So let's look at that yeasty side of things. Yeah. I do like how this goes together. So the yeasty side of things for me, see if we actually get any kind of yeast or sediment out of this. I don't see much in there, which is good because obviously that means the beer is pretty fresh. But yeah, the yeasty side of this beer, you do get a slightly more dense, kind of wholemeal, brown bready, doughy sort of thing there. And you can feel it's got a wee bit of sweetness to it, but it's got a bit of a kind of woody, crackery wrapping to it, a little bit of honeycomb as well. I always get honeycomb on that back third of the palate for sure, but yeah, definitely. You can feel that the back third of your palate, the flavour is absolutely taller there, and then as you come further forward into the middle third of your palate, it just kind of condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. So yeah, that's kind of interesting on this one for sure. But I think we've covered the malty and yeasty side of the beer at this point, so let's go on to the hoppy side of things. So for me, let's go to the green component first. For me, definitely a little bit of earthiness in the back corners of your palate there. as you move further forward, you can feel a little bit of a herbal character, and as you reach the kind of front corners of your palate, you do get a little bit of that sort of floral aromatic spice that kind of lingers there. Round the front curve of the tongue, it's a little bit lighter and more kind of grassy, I would say. So yeah, a nice little bit of a lighter sort of grassiness in there, and you get a wee touch of zestiness coming out of the beer as well, actually. So yeah, a little bit of zesty grassiness in there, and that is quite nice. On the, I think that's everything we need to say about the green component, actually, but you do get a bit more bitterness out of this beer the further into the aftertaste that you go. But let's look at that front third of your palate then, and the fruity side of things. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you do get a little bit of that kind of brown bready bit in the bottom. You get that bready build up, so brown bread in the bottom, white bread in the top, and then the base of the front third of your palate, it's the bread crust, the crackery sort of notes, maybe a little touch of woodiness as well, the brown bread, the white bread, maybe a little bit of the wheat as well. Then you feel that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So yeah, on the fruity side of things then, let's have a little look at that. The fruity side of this beer is quite interesting. I think it leans mainly toward the Idaho 7, but you do just get a little touch of the Centennial into the aftertaste. So if you go to the back of that front third of your tongue, you do get a little bit of that kind of like peachy sharpness in there, and as you move further forward, lots of kind of ripe, juicy mango, and as you reach the middle of that front third of your tongue, you do get a little bit of you certainly get a little bit of a juicy, more you do get a little bit more of a kind of juicy, yeah, it's more of a juicy mango that's there, but underneath that you get a little bit of a kind of drier apricot, definitely a little bit of papaya as you move further forward, and quite a bit of juicy pineapple as well. Then as you move further forward into that front half, the front half of that front third of your tongue, it's absolutely a little bit more of a kind of lemony, zesty type character that you get out of the beer. So yeah, the way that that goes together, I think, is really very, very nice. Yeah, I think that covers everything we need to say about the fruity side of the beer. The only thing I would add is that it does lean a little bit more toward the tropical side of things in the beginning when you take the beer in, but you certainly get more zestiness and more of the green component the further into the aftertaste that you go. So yeah, overall, it's quite a yeasty, farmhousey, kind of woody leaning New England IPA, this one, and it covers its booze very well. But as I say, the fruity character on this one is quite unique too, so as I say, it gets a big thumbs up from me. Let's round off this review then with a wee look at the mouthfeel. So for me, mouthfeel wise, this beer again, it feels like kind of, it's mid-bodied, but maybe kind of pushing toward the top end of mid-bodied. It's very light actually. I've one of the lighter New England triples that I've had for sure, but that doesn't mean it's lacking in flavour. But yeah, maybe top end of mid-bodied, that push. Carbonation has a little touch of crispness to it, but otherwise it's very, very smooth, and it's quite a wet and kind of smooth and slightly dry New England IPA, this one. As I say, it's one of the more yeasty, farmhousey leaning New Englands that I've had, which is kind of interesting. But on the hoppy side of things, in terms of the IBU count, I think this is quite low. I think it's maybe a standard sort of 30 or 40 IBU with this one, but you do have a fair bit of dryness with this one, so you have to talk about perceived bitterness versus calculated bitterness in this one. So maybe the perceived bitterness is about 40, maybe 50 IBUs because of the dryness, but the actual calculated bitterness in this one will probably be about 30, I would think. And you do get a wee bit more hoppy bitterness out of this one further into the aftertaste that you go, so that's worth bearing in mind. Now, the base, as I say, the fruity side of this beer is quite nice and juicy. It leans more toward the tropical side of things in the beginning. You get a bit of a citrusy kind of punch in the middle from the Centennial, but then yeah, it's more about the Idaho 7. So I think Idaho 7 strikes me as being the more dominant hop in this recipe actually. But overall, a very nice beer, this one, and quite a farmhousey leaning New England IPA for sure, which kind of is in keeping with the sort of vibe that I've had from looking at all of these Vertere beers on the Liquor Shop Asahiya Facebook page and things. These guys do strike me as being like quite a saison-y, wit beer, Hefeweizen, farmhousey IPA type brewery, this one. So these guys are really interesting. I do think we need to go out there and have a little look and do an out and about video at some stage. But yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. So yeah, this has been the Tristis, a 10% New England hazy, imperial triple, whatever you want to call it, IPA. Very, very nice sort of farmhousey leaning beast of a beer, this one, from Vertere in Okutama in the western part of Tokyo Prefecture here in Japan. So yeah, once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Vertere as well. And we will see about returning to these guys again at some point in the fairly near future. I do apologise that these Japanese reviews are a bit longer. I'm filming later at night when my brain's a bit dead. That's what having kids does to you. It makes your brain a little bit dead. But yeah, these Japanese beer reviews are pretty fun. And I do want to make sure I review some nice beers for you here. But check out my social media, check out Vertere's social media, and do check out Liquor Shop Asahiya as well. And I will catch you guys in another review very shortly. Slàinte, skål, cheers, and see you guys in the next one. Ciao just now.